So thank you for having me with you this morning, and I'm sorry you are in my dining room and I'm not with you in person. Some of you may know that Bishop Michael and I and Archdeacon Jane work our way around different deaneries over time, and it's lovely to be working my way around in Hertford and Ware. So may I speak in the name of God, who's Father, Son and Holy Spirit. Amen. It always brings a smile when I recall the wedding breakfast of a friend of mine. There were no menus on the table, and after grace, we were invited to sit down to enjoy the bride and groom's favourite meal with them. Imagine the surprise of some of the guests when we were served shepherd's pie and local vegetables, followed by apple crumble and custard. As the groom explained in his speech, they had tried all sorts of menus, but felt that this best represented them, as it was something that was shared and that everyone could enjoy. Food and drink are such an essential part of celebrations, and aren't we missing those just now? They can make or break an experience. In Jesus' time, to run out of wine at a wedding was not a matter of life or death, but it was a major social faux pas and would subject the family to social disgrace that would long be remembered. Apparently, it might even cause a lawsuit by a disgruntled guest if he didn't get hospitality appropriate to the value of his wedding gift. Fathers of the bride, beware. John tells us that this was the first of Jesus' signs, and that through it he revealed his glory. You'll remember that John doesn't have any parables in his gospel, and he only records 7 miracles, which he calls signs. Of course, they function both as miracles and as parables, because by calling them signs, Jesus alerts us to the fact that we need to probe more dearly. So this isn't just a miracle which, out of goodness of his heart, Jesus rescues an embarrassed wedding host. John intends us to probe deeper. The signs are not just supernatural acts, they're significant acts. They don't just have an effect, they have meaning. To understand more, we need to be immersed in the Jewish mindset, which on hearing the word marriage feast or wedding banquet, would immediately think of the anticipated messianic banquet which heralded the long-awaited Messiah. And weddings have wine, and God has the best wine cellar of all. Isaiah tells us that on this mountain the Lord of hosts will make for all peoples a feast of rich food, a feast of well-aged wines, of rich food filled with marrow, of well-aged wines strained clear. That last little detail, strained clear, was very important in an age when most wine was pretty rough in more ways than one and needed to be diluted with water to make it palatable. But God offers only the best. Hence the head waiter's punchline when he says to the bridegroom, most hosts serve the best wine first and the poorer stuff when the guests are drunk, but you have saved the best until the end. So we have a sign performed in the backwater village of Cana that points us to the lavish extravagance of God's messianic banquet. And just as Jesus produces the best wine of the lot at the end, so God has saved his very best gift to Israel and the world to the last. Something better than the law, which was prized so dearly as God's gift to the people, is given in Jesus Christ. John begins his gospel with the statement we heard at Christmas. From his fullness have we all received grace upon grace. Not just the grace of the law, but now grace and truth that come through Jesus Christ. So no wonder John begins his gospel with a wedding banquet, telling us that this sign indicates the dawn of the age that comes in Jesus Christ. It's not just grace, but grace upon grace. Not just life, but abundant life. As Jesus himself said, I am come that they might have life and have it abundantly. For one of Jesus's disciples, Nathanael, this sign was particularly startling. As Leon read at the beginning of our gospel reading, on the third day. So we can reasonably ask what happened 3 days ago. John tells us that Nathanael had met Jesus for the first time and had been amazed when Jesus saw him under a fig tree and knew him. Jesus had said to Nathanael, don't be surprised at that. You're going to see much greater things. You'll see heaven opened. And almost immediately this miracle happened. What John doesn't tell us here, but does tell us at the very end of his gospel, is that Nathanael came from Cana. So this miracle, this revelation of Jesus's glory, happened in his own town. Sometimes it's easier to expect miracles to happen elsewhere, in fact anywhere but on our doorstep. But this sign challenges us to believe that God will reveal his glory in our daily lives, on our doorsteps, and inside if we're not able even to be there. And this story is particularly appropriate for us this week when we are in the season of Epiphany, as Joe reminded us, all about the revelation of Jesus Christ. We began Epiphany with the revelation of God's glory in the baby Jesus to the Gentile Magi. Then the revelation of Jesus Christ in his baptism, when the voice from heaven said, "This is my beloved Son." And now, today, the revelation of Jesus' glory in his first miracle. The pre-Lent season, and isn't it sad to see Easter eggs in shops already? It culminates with the revelation of Jesus' glory in the Transfiguration. We are in the season of Epiphanies, of the revelation of God's glory. And Nathanael's experience reminds us to be open to signs in our midst. But there's another connection we need to make before we leave this story. Week by week, even day by day, we celebrate a foretaste of this wedding banquet of heaven. When we can, we take bread and wine and celebrate the saving death and resurrection of Jesus Christ and the promise of God's coming kingdom. John's Gospel does not have a Last Supper story, but instead gives us this sign in the wine. And later, when Jesus feeds the 5,000, he gives us a sign in the bread. 2 of Jesus' 7 signs in John's Gospel point us to the feast of heaven. And in both cases, there is lavish abundance. Not just wine, but the best wine. Not just enough bread, but 12 baskets left over. There is nothing frugal about God's banquet, and it is to this banquet that we are invited today and every day. When we are able to receive communion, we may only receive a small piece of bread or a sip of wine, but it's not the physical quantity that matters. It's what they point us to and open up for us. So as Joe celebrates the Eucharist and receives the bread and wine in a few minutes, let us remember not just the Last Supper, but also the wedding feast at Cana and the feeding of the 5,000. And let their oversupply of food and drink be to each one of us a revelation of the glory of God seen in Jesus Christ, and a reminder, even in these challenging times, to look forward to the banquet in heaven at the marriage feast of the Lamb. Joe's already mentioned that we're in the week of prayer for Christian unity. And so this is an important perspective to keep, one which challenges our complacency about our lack of Eucharistic unity on earth, and also a challenge to our complacency about world poverty, pandemic, debt, and hunger. So let that revelation of God's glory and generosity stay with each of us during this week, particularly when we run into situations of challenge, world shortages and needs, food, medical supplies, peace, justice, COVID restrictions and loss. When that seems to tempt us to despair, ask yourself, if the God we love and serve is so generous and enjoys a celebration enough to keep the party going even longer, and has plans for the ultimate wedding banquet and heaven, what can we do to express that generosity to others in words and deeds, in thought and in prayer? Amen.
Amen.